The wind drifted through the dry rows of sunflowers outside the Brooks farm, whispering low through brittle stalks as the last light of day kissed the top of the barn roof. Inside, a soft voice rose, barely above a whisper, just enough to be heard if you were listening. And Sam Brooks was always listening. From the porch of the small farmhouse, he sat in his usual spot on the creaking bench, a cup of black coffee growing cold in his hands. His boots were muddy from another long day of harvest chores, his flannel shirt stuck to his back with sweat. But he didn't move. Not yet. The singing had started. The voice came from the barn. His daughter, Emily, was in there again, probably sitting on that overturned feed bucket with her notebook balanced on her knees. She always waited until the sun started to slip low, when the world outside grew soft and the barn felt like a chapel. Sam never interrupted. He never even told her he heard. It was a ritual neither of them acknowledged, a silence wrapped in fragile trust. In the barn, Emily sang as if the walls were holding her secrets. Her voice had a tremble to it, unsure, but underneath it, something raw and aching lived. She wasn't trying to sound good. She wasn't trying to sound like anything at all. She was just letting the melody find her. Her fingers moved over the pages of her battered notebook. Most of the lyrics were scrawled in smudged pencil, edited and re-edited until the paper thinned. An old, cracked wristwatch, her mother's, served as her paperweight. She never wore it, but never left it behind. The song she worked on tonight had no title yet, just a line. Even the sky gets quiet when no one's watching. Sam took another slow sip of coffee. He thought of Caroline, his late wife, and the way her voice used to fill their house before cancer made it silent. Emily didn't remember much about her mom's singing, just stories and the few scratchy home videos Sam had clung to like lifeboats. Inside the barn, Emily stopped mid-line. She closed the notebook and tucked it into her backpack, her movements gentle. She didn't want to wake the quiet. At school the next day, the cafeteria buzzed with usual lunchtime noise. Emily sat at the far end of the table with her tray of barely touched food. Her head was bent, fingers pulling at the edge of a napkin. She watched as a group of girls gathered near the bulletin board. Aubrey Sutton stood front and center, her honey blonde hair pulled into a perfect braid, nails painted like little polished mirrors. She pointed at the flyer taped up under the banner. Middle school talent show. Sign-ups open now. Emily's breath caught. For a moment, just a moment, something stirred. A flicker. "Of course," Aubrey said with a sugary sneer. "Some people probably shouldn't bother. Wouldn't want to embarrass themselves in front of the whole town." She didn't look at Emily when she said it, but she didn't have to. Emily ducked her head lower. That night, the flyer was folded in half and shoved deep into her backpack, tucked between her history textbook and the crumpled paper bag from lunch. When she got home, the barn was empty. Her dad wasn't back yet from dropping off seed orders in town. She walked straight through the house, grabbing her notebook from her bedroom, and made her way to the barn. She didn't turn on the light, just slid the door halfway open, enough to let the fading daylight paint the hayloft gold. She sang softer than usual that evening. Her voice caught on the edges of the notes. She'd never sung in front of anyone, not even her dad. Especially not him. What if she wasn't good enough? What if her voice cracked? What if she tried and failed, and everything got smaller than it already was? She closed her notebook and sat there in the hay-sweet air, clutching her mother's old watch in both hands. Back at the house, Sam returned just after sunset. He set his keys on the counter and noticed something new sticking out from Emily's open backpack. He pulled it free. A school flyer, crumpled but readable. He stood there staring at it. The talent show. His heart tugged in that quiet way it had since Caroline's last days. She had begged him to keep music in Emily's life. He'd tried, but maybe not hard enough. That night, long after Emily had gone to bed, Sam stepped into the barn alone. He looked around, walked to the corner where she usually sat. Her notebook was gone, but the air still felt full of her voice. He turned and walked back to the house. From the hallway closet, he pulled out a dusty black case. Inside, his old guitar, scratched, strings dulled, but still in tune. He stared at it for a long time before taking it with him back to the barn. He didn't say a word, just leaned the guitar case against the wooden beam where Emily always sat. When she walked into the barn the next afternoon, it was the first thing she saw, She froze, heart thudding. Her fingers brushed the latch. She opened it slowly. Inside was the guitar, and beneath it, a folded note. It read, "If you sing, I'll listen. Dad." She closed the case, pressed her hands to her face, and smiled through the sting in her eyes. The sky outside deepened into dusk, and in the barn that smelled of hay and old wood and dreams half remembered, Emily sat down, placed her notebook on her lap, and began to hum. She sang like maybe, just maybe, someone was finally listening. The hallway outside the Haydenfield Middle School auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. Posters announcing the school talent show hung slightly crooked on the walls, fluttering faintly each time a student rushed past. At the end of the hall, a single clipboard hung beneath a large banner, "Winter Talent Showcase Sign-Up." Emily Brooks stood across from it, clutching the strap of her backpack so tightly her knuckles paled. Her boots scuffed softly against the tiled floor as she shifted her weight from foot to foot. Just past the clipboard stood Aubrey Sutton and two of her friends, watching like hawks circling a quiet field mouse. "Oh, look," Aubrey said with a voice so sweet it curdled. "Emily Brooks. Did you lose something, or just waiting to see who else signs up first?" Emily kept her eyes down. The pen dangling from the clipboard swayed slightly. Her name wasn't on the list, not yet. "Maybe she's writing a song about farm chores," one of Aubrey's friends whispered just loud enough to be heard. They giggled. Emily turned away. Coach Miller appeared like a gust of wind, clipboard in hand and whistle around his neck, even though he wasn't coaching anything today. "Morning, ladies," he said, glancing at the sign-up sheet. "Room for a few more names, I see." He gave Emily a small nod, then bent slightly so only she could hear. "You don't need noise to make an impact, kid. It's not the loud ones who leave a mark. It's the true ones." Emily didn't respond, but her fingers twitched. She looked at the list. 10 names, all typed in confident print. Her name would look shaky by comparison, but shaky wasn't silence. With a sudden inhale, she stepped forward and signed her name, Emily Brooks. Slot number 11. Then she turned and walked away, past Aubrey, past the bulletin board, past the ache in her throat. The audition room smelled faintly of chalk dust and stale coffee. Miss Jenkins sat at a folding table, her pencil poised, though she wasn't writing anything. The stage was nothing more than a raised platform with an old stool and a single mic stand. Emily waited just beyond the curtain, fingers trembling. Her guitar strap pressed into her shoulder. Her throat felt dry, too dry to sing. Maybe she should have stayed home. Maybe this was a mistake. "Next, please," Miss Jenkins called gently. Emily stepped onto the stage. Her heart pounded in her chest like it was trying to escape. She adjusted the mic, tried not to look at the 3 faculty members seated at the judges' table. Then, she pulled the guitar over her shoulder and strummed a single chord. Her hand wavered. Then she began. The first note was barely a whisper. The second carried a tremor. But by the third, something fragile had taken root and refused to break. Emily sang of quiet days, of sunflower fields and barns at twilight, of voices held too long and words never spoken. Her voice wavered but didn't falter. There was no flash, no showmanship, just truth. At the back of the auditorium, unseen by Emily, a man in a sun-faded flannel shirt slipped quietly into the hallway shadows. Sam Brooks stood just outside the door, one hand resting on the peeling frame, listening. The sound of his daughter's voice, something he hadn't truly heard since she was little, reached him like sunlight breaking through clouded glass. He closed his eyes. He didn't know the lyrics. He didn't need to. Every word was a letter from her soul, addressed to the world she wasn't sure would ever hear her. Miss Jenkins didn't smile during the performance. She rarely did, but she didn't write anything either. When Emily finished, the silence lingered like a prayer. "Thank you, Emily," she said softly. "You may go." Emily nodded once, then left the stage without meeting anyone's eye. As she passed through the doors and into the hallway, Sam had already stepped away, leaving behind only the soft imprint of boot soles in the dust. That night, Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The audition had happened. She didn't know what they thought, didn't know if it mattered. Downstairs, Sam sat at the kitchen table, a cup of black coffee slowly cooling in his hand. He reached into the corner closet, the one he hadn't opened in years, and pulled out a rust-covered toolbox. Then he walked to the barn. The old upright piano stood against the back wall, its keys chipped, some yellowed from time and dust. He ran his hand over the wood. The last time it was played, his wife was alive. Emily had been 7. He lifted the lid, exposing the keys, pressed one. It gave a tired, hollow note. Still, he stayed there in the cold barn for hours, tightening pegs, dusting hammers, oiling joints. He wasn't a piano tuner, but he was a father who had just heard his daughter sing for the world. And if she was brave enough to try again, he'd be ready, not with applause, but with a place to play. The morning after the audition list was posted, the air buzzed in the hallways of Haydenfield Middle School. Emily barely lifted her head as she walked past the cafeteria, trying not to hear the whispers, but they found her anyway. She only got picked because they felt sorry for her, someone said, just loud enough. She probably cried during her audition, another voice chimed in. You know Miss Jenkins is retiring. She's going soft. Emily pressed her notebook tighter to her chest and kept walking, her cheeks burning. She knew exactly who was behind it. Aubrey Sutton stood near her usual spot by the trophy case, lips curled in a smirk, flanked by her friends. She didn't need to say a word. The damage had already been done. By the time Emily got home that afternoon, the world felt heavier than ever. Her father's truck wasn't in the driveway. Good, she thought. She didn't want to pretend to be okay. She made it to the barn before the tears came. The same wooden loft where she used to build forts with her mom, the same dusty beams that caught her whispers at night, now echoed with the quiet thud of her sobs. She climbed up and sat in the hayloft, her back to the rafters, knees pulled to her chest. I don't belong up there, she whispered into her arms. I never did. That's where Sam found her. He had come home early, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. Intuition, maybe. The sun was dipping low behind the cottonwoods as he stepped into the barn, the light painting golden stripes across the floor. He didn't say anything when he saw her. Instead, he walked slowly to the wall, picked up his guitar, the one he hadn't touched in years, and sat on the stool. He strummed a few chords, the sound creaky, as if the strings were waking up from a long nap. Emily turned, startled by the sound, her tear-streaked face peeking from above the loft edge. Her father looked up, then back down at his hands. I was never good at speeches, he said softly. But sometimes, music says what words can't. She didn't move, didn't speak. He started to play a melody. Slow, thoughtful. It wasn't perfect. One of the strings buzzed, and the rhythm hesitated now and then. But it was real, raw and reaching. After a few moments, he looked up and said the only thing she needed to hear. Sing it like it's just you and the stars. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but her breathing slowed. She nodded, just barely. That night, she stayed in the barn long after the sun had set. The sky outside was a dome of ink, scattered with pinholes of starlight. Inside, she held her notebook, torn pages fluttering with drafts of lyrics, thoughts she'd never said aloud. She made a decision. She would sing, not for Aubrey, not for the crowd, but for the version of herself who had once believed she couldn't. The next day at school, Emily walked a little straighter. She didn't respond when Aubrey passed her in the hallway, whispering just loud enough, better hope they have a sympathy round. She didn't need to. At lunch, Miss Jenkins tapped gently on Emily's shoulder and motioned for her to follow. They walked in silence to the music room, where the blinds were drawn and the air smelled faintly of old sheet music and lavender hand cream. I wanted to give you something, Miss Jenkins said, opening a small drawer in her desk. She pulled out a silver pendant, a delicate chain with a single treble clef hanging at the end, worn but still gleaming. My father gave this to me before my first recital. I was terrified, she smiled. But he told me, even the quietest notes carry when you believe in them. I think it's time someone else wore it. Emily hesitated. I can't. Miss Jenkins reached out, clasped the chain gently around Emily's neck. You already are. That evening, back in the barn, Emily didn't need lyrics. She sat at the piano her father had begun tuning and let her fingers drift over the keys. The notes didn't always make sense, but they sounded like her. The fear hadn't gone, but something else had arrived alongside it. Resolve. She was still that shy girl, still unsure, but she would sing, and she wouldn't tell anyone what it would be until the lights hit the stage and her voice filled the quiet. Let them whisper. She had a song to write. The first night they sat in the barn together, there was no plan, no sheet music, no warm-up, no rules. Just silence, broken only by the occasional creak of wooden beams and the faint rustling of sunflower stalks outside. Sam tuned his old guitar, the strings clicking softly under his fingers, while Emily stood by the window, staring out into the darkness like it might offer her an answer. A single bulb swung gently overhead, casting a yellowish halo around them. Outside, the Nebraska wind whispered through the fields, rustling dried leaves against the siding. "Want to start with what you've got?" Sam asked gently, cradling the guitar. Emily didn't turn. Her arms were crossed, notebook clutched to her chest. "I don't know if it's ready." "You don't have to be ready to start," he said. "You just have to start." She turned slowly, then walked to the hay bale she'd been using as a seat and opened her notebook. The paper was wrinkled from being clutched too often. She cleared her throat. It's a song I wrote a while ago. I never thought anyone would hear it." "Then tonight," Sam said, "it can be the melody they never heard." The title struck something deep in her. She looked up, surprised. "That's what I called it." Sam smiled softly. "Then it's time to let it live." She began to hum the first few bars, tentative, like dipping her toe in icy water. Sam listened closely, matching the tempo, the rhythm, adding soft chords beneath her voice. The melody was fragile but honest, like a letter never sent. As she sang, her voice cracked on the higher notes, and she stopped abruptly, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I can't," she whispered. "It doesn't sound right. I don't sound right." Sam stopped playing. "You sound exactly like someone who's telling the truth. That's the best kind of music there is." Emily looked down at her lap. "I don't want to disappoint anyone. I'm not Mom. I don't sing like her. I don't look like her. What if people are expecting her and all they get is me?" Sam set the guitar down gently and walked over. He crouched in front of her, looking up into her eyes. "You're not your mom, and that's not a disappointment. That's a gift. She had her own voice. You have yours, and I've been silent long enough. I don't want to miss another melody because I was too busy comparing it to the past." Emily's lip quivered. "But what if it's not enough?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a weathered photo, a snapshot of her mother holding a baby Emily, smiling wide, standing in that very same barn. "Your mom never got to sing her own songs. Life got in the way. You're already doing what she never could. That's more than enough." That night, they rehearsed the entire first verse together. Sam's guitar playing was rusty at first, but there was a warmth in his rhythm that made Emily feel safe. She didn't need to be flawless. She just needed to be present. Over the next few days, they met each evening after chores. As the sun dipped low and cast golden light through the barn slats, their music wove through the quiet, an offering, a promise, a prayer. Emily slowly opened up, adding more verses to the song. Lyrics about nights she spent wondering if anyone would ever hear her, about a father who used to hum in the kitchen before he forgot how. One night, after finishing a tricky bridge section, she turned to Sam and asked, "Why'd you really stop playing?" Sam hesitated, his hands still on the strings. "Because every note reminded me of her, of what I didn't say, of what I didn't support. I used to think music was what took her away, always chasing dreams we never made space for." Emily frowned. "But music didn't take her away. Cancer did." He nodded slowly. "I know that now, but for a long time, it was easier to blame the music than to sit with the silence she left behind." Emily reached over and touched his wrist. "We're not filling the silence anymore, Dad. We're turning it into something." Sam looked at her, really looked, and something inside him unnodded. They played the final chorus of The Melody They Never Heard together that night. Emily's voice rang clear, still tremulous but stronger than before. Sam's harmony rose quietly beneath hers, like roots beneath a tree. As the last note faded, they sat in silence, staring at the beam of moonlight cutting through the rafters. Then, Emily turned. Would you play with me at the show?" Sam's breath caught. He hadn't played for an audience in 15 years, but as he looked at his daughter, not a whisper of who her mother was, but a voice all her own, he nodded. "If you'll let me," he said. Emily smiled, wide and a little stunned. "Then let's make sure it's the melody they'll never forget." 2 days before the talent show, the air inside Haydenfield Middle buzzed with nervous energy. Flyers were taped on every locker, rehearsal slots were double booked, and the auditorium lights flickered with a kind of jittery anticipation. Emily, clutching her lyric notebook like it was a lifeline, ducked into the music room during lunch for a quiet place to practice. She thought she was alone. She didn't notice the figure leaning casually outside the cracked door, Aubrey Sutton, arms crossed, head tilted. Her lips curled into a faint smirk as the sound of a melody drifted through the opening. Soft, honest notes. No fancy runs, no forced vibrato. Just something raw and startlingly beautiful. Inside, Emily sat hunched at the upright piano, whispering lyrics to herself. Her fingers trembled slightly over the keys, but her voice was steadier now. She closed her eyes and let the song wrap around her like a blanket. When she finished the final verse, a deliberate, slow clap echoed behind her. "Wow," Aubrey said sweetly, stepping into the room. "That was unexpected." Emily startled, turning fast enough to drop her pencil. "Sorry," Aubrey added, waving a dismissive hand. "Didn't mean to scare you, just stumbled in. But seriously, you sounded really nice." The compliment was laced with a sugary tone that left a sour aftertaste. "Thanks," Emily replied, cautious. Aubrey leaned in, eyes scanning the music sheet spread out beside the piano. "Are these your lyrics? You write your own stuff? That's brave." Emily nodded slowly. "I guess we're both in the show," Aubrey added. "Would be a shame if something happened to those beautiful lyrics. You've got quite the vibe." And with that cryptic comment, she turned on her heel and left, the click of her heels like punctuation in the silence. That night, Emily couldn't shake the unease. She mentioned it briefly to her dad over dinner, but he didn't press. The next day, disaster struck. Emily opened her locker before homeroom and found her folder torn to shreds. Sheet music littered the floor like confetti. Her handwritten lyrics, the ones she'd rewritten and refined for weeks, were gone, shredded, crumpled, ruined. Her breath caught in her throat. Someone had gone through her locker. This wasn't an accident. Coach Miller happened to be passing by and froze when he saw her crouched on the floor. What happened here? Emily could only shake her head. Coach knelt to help her gather the pieces. "You still remember the melody?" She hesitated. "Kind of." He gave her a firm nod. "Then we start there. Trust your gut." That afternoon, Emily sat silently in the passenger seat as Sam drove them home. Her silence was heavy, the kind that filled the cab with more meaning than words could carry. When they reached the farm, she didn't wait. She made a beeline for the barn. Sam followed minutes later, finding her seated on the piano bench, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. She didn't look up. He didn't ask what happened. He just sat beside her. "Try the chorus," he said quietly. She shook her head. "I don't remember all the chords. I can hear it in my head, but it's fuzzy." Sam gently lifted his guitar from the nearby hook, strummed a few soft notes. "Then let's play what you feel," he said. "Forget the paper. Music was never meant to be caged in ink." She sniffled, wiped her sleeve across her face, and hummed the first few notes. He played along. Bit by bit, it came back. Not exactly the same, maybe better. Something in the moment made it truer, freer. Her voice was tentative at first, but by the second verse, it grew stronger. He matched her, chord for chord, note for note. Later that evening, Sam strung up a set of old Edison bulbs along the beams of the barn. Their warm glow turned the wooden space into something almost magical. "If we're doing this," he said, plugging in the last bulb, "we do it our way." They rehearsed beneath the lights until the moon climbed high. Outside, the wind hummed through the cornfields like a distant harmony. Emily began to hum without looking at her lyrics. She closed her eyes, listening to the music take shape in her chest instead of off the page. And when she missed a note, she didn't flinch. She found her way back. Under the soft golden glow, father and daughter played not for perfection, but for truth, not for applause, but for each other. That night, as they packed up and turned off the lights, Sam paused and said, "You know, sometimes the best songs are the ones nobody sees coming." Emily looked at him, eyes bright but tired. "Yeah?" He smiled. "And I think yours might be one of them." For the first time in days, she let herself believe it. The barn door creaked shut behind them, but the melody lingered, echoing in the rafters long after the lights went dark. The night of the talent show arrived cloaked in late autumn chill. The sky over rural Nebraska hung heavy with stars, as if the universe had paused to watch what would unfold in the middle school auditorium that night. The parking lot outside was buzzing with parents, teachers, students, and the kind of electric anticipation that made even the gravel underfoot seem to crackle. Inside the school, the auditorium glowed softly under overhead lights, folding chairs arranged in neat rows before a modest wooden stage. Decorations made by the art club dangled from the ceiling, paper stars, glitter-painted musical notes, and hand-lettered banners that read Haydenfield Middle School Talent Night. Backstage, the green room was a blur of sequins, hair gel, and nervous pacing. Emily sat on a bench near the coat rack, her fingers laced tightly in her lap. She wore a pale blue sweater over jeans. No sparkle, no flair, just her. Around her wrist hung a bracelet once belonging to her mother, a delicate chain with a single charm shaped like a sunflower. Resting against her chest was the pendant Miss Jenkins had given her, a small silver treble clef that caught the stage lights whenever she moved. She could hear the muffled sound of the crowd filtering through the curtains. Laughter, programs shuffling, a cough, a low hum of excitement. Every sound pressed on her chest like a growing weight. Sam entered the green room quietly, his worn guitar case in hand. The case was covered in stickers from a younger time: Red Wing Folk Fest, Keep Music Honest, and a faded one with his old band name, Back Porch Revival. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat beside his daughter and placed the case gently at his feet. "They're loud out there," she said softly, more to the floor than to him. "Yeah," he replied, looking straight ahead. "That's how you know they're listening." She nodded, then shook her head. Her breathing had turned shallow, her fingers trembling in her lap. "What if I mess up? What if I forget the words, or my voice cracks, or no one claps?" Sam turned to face her fully. "You wrote the song. You lived the words. You already did the hard part. Singing it, that's just letting the truth out." Her eyes darted to the side curtain, where the lineup list was pinned. Her name was 3 slots away. The air in the green room felt thinner by the minute. Sam leaned in closer and whispered, "You've already won, Em, just by being here. The rest, that's gravy." Meanwhile, out in the auditorium, the show was moving along. A tap-dancing duo had just finished, followed by a boy performing magic tricks that mostly confused the audience. Then came Aubrey Sutton. She stepped onto the stage in a glittering emerald dress. Hair curled to perfection, her grand piano wheeled to center stage like royalty. The applause before she even played a note was thunderous, the kind that came from recognition, not necessarily talent. Aubrey launched into her performance with theatrical flair. Her fingers danced over the keys with practiced ease, her voice swelling through the auditorium in carefully crafted crescendos. But something in the performance felt rehearsed. Polished, yes, but hollow, like a show put on for applause rather than truth. Backstage, Emily could hear every note. It filled her ears like a challenge. She tightened her grip on her guitar strap. Her name would be called next. Sam stood, stretched his hand toward her. "Come on, it's time." She didn't move right away. Her feet were rooted to the floor by doubt, by fear, by the sheer magnitude of stepping into that light. Then she looked at her bracelet, at the charm, the sunflower, a small quiet reminder of someone who had once believed music could grow from pain. She stood, slowly, pulled her guitar strap over her shoulder. Miss Jenkins was by the curtain, clipboard in hand. She smiled and gave a subtle nod. The auditorium hushed. Next up, the MC announced, Emily Brooks, performing an original piece titled The Melody They Never Heard. The single spotlight beamed onto center stage. Emily stepped out. It felt like walking into a dream. The bright light masked most of the crowd, turning faces into silhouettes. The stage floor beneath her boots creaked just slightly. She stopped at the center mic, adjusted the stand, and took a breath. The crowd waited, silent. Behind her, just off to stage right, Sam settled on a stool, his guitar in hand, the neck resting gently on his knee. Emily closed her eyes. She didn't need to see them. She just needed to remember the barn, the string lights, the sound of wind pressing against the wood. She needed to remember why she wrote this song in the first place. She strummed once. The sound rang out, pure and trembling. Then she began to sing. It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect, but it was hers. And in that moment, every whisper, every doubt, every shadow she'd ever carried melted beneath the weight of something far greater than fear. It melted beneath the light. The hush that fell over the auditorium as Emily stepped under the spotlight felt less like silence and more like breath being held. The weight of expectation, of curiosity, of thinly veiled judgment hung over the rows of folding chairs like early morning fog. Somewhere in the crowd, a phone screen dimmed. A whisper faded mid-sentence. Even the old light fixtures above seemed to buzz quieter, as if they too were waiting. Emily stood at the center of it all, frozen for a heartbeat. The black microphone in front of her looked enormous. Her guitar, slung over her shoulder, suddenly felt heavier than it ever had in rehearsal. The strings had been freshly tuned, but she could barely hear them over the rapid-fire drumbeat in her chest. Her mother's bracelet glinted faintly beneath the stage lights, wrapped snug around her right wrist. Around her neck, the silver treble clef pendant rested against her collarbone like a quiet promise. She inhaled. And then, one note, software tentative. True. It wasn't perfect. Her voice quivered just slightly, but it rang out into the space like it belonged there. No music yet, no words, just that first fragile note, carrying everything she couldn't say aloud. The sound seemed to stretch across the room and settle onto every shoulder. Aubrey, sitting stage left behind the velvet curtain, leaned forward. Her lips parted, not in mockery, but in something closer to disbelief. This wasn't the Emily Brooks she knew, or thought she knew. This was something else entirely. The first chord followed, warm and low, as Emily found her footing. Her fingers settled onto the strings with muscle memory, born from countless nights in the barn. The melody eased out like a thread unspooling. She began to sing. The lyrics, written in her slanted handwriting weeks ago, found their shape again in her throat. Each line carried a piece of her, the fear of not being enough, the ache of missing someone she barely remembered, the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, she was more than a whisper in the background. She didn't look at the crowd. Her gaze hovered just above them, focused on a point beyond the exit doors. And then, halfway through the second verse, she heard it. A second guitar. The sound slipped in from the side of the stage, a soft harmony to her melody. Familiar, steady, her father. Sam stood at the very edge of the curtain, just outside the circle of light. His head was bowed slightly, eyes focused on his strings. The old guitar case, decorated in stickers from years gone by, sat behind him like a witness. He didn't try to take over. He played beneath her voice, lifting it, wrapping it gently. For a moment, Emily faltered. Her breath hitched, her fingers stuttered. Then she caught herself, nodded once, and kept going. Their voices met in the chorus. I was the melody they never heard, tangled in silence, lost in the blur. But tonight I'll sing it, soft and clear, for the hearts that never got to hear. Their voices weren't perfect together. They cracked in different places, leaned into harmonies that weren't always polished. But they belonged, a father and daughter, singing a wound into something whole. Sam didn't look at the crowd. His eyes were on her, full of something close to awe. The last note came like the first, unadorned and honest. Emily let it fade slowly, almost afraid to let it go. And when it finally dissolved into the stillness, there was nothing. No clapping, no cheering, just silence. The kind of silence that held its breath. Someone sniffled in the second row. A woman placed a hand over her chest. A boy in the back straightened up as if seeing something he didn't quite understand but couldn't look away from. Then slowly, like dawn creeping over the edge of a field, the room stood, one row at a time. No hollering, no whistles, just reverent, stunned applause that rose like a tide. It wasn't the kind of ovation reserved for showstoppers or high notes nailed. It was something deeper. Recognition, maybe, or gratitude. Emily looked over at her father. He met her eyes. They didn't smile. They didn't need to. They had already said everything in the song. And in that moment, under one simple spotlight, in front of an auditorium full of people who would never look at her the same again, Emily Brooks became something more than a shy farmer's daughter. She became the note they would never forget. By the time morning light filtered through the windows of Haydenfield Middle, the whispers had already taken root. Emily hadn't even stepped off the bus before the hallways buzzed with fragments of her name, but now it sounded different, not as a target, as a story. She walked down the corridor unsure of what to make of it. Students nodded at her. Some even smiled. A few teachers looked up from their clipboards and gave the kind of glance reserved for someone who had shifted a room, if only for a few minutes. Her steps were quieter than usual, not from fear, but from disbelief, like walking through the echo of something too big to hold all at once. Near her locker, Coach Miller approached with his usual whistle swinging from his lanyard and a battered envelope tucked in his hand. His face was tired in a way that meant he'd stayed late at the show the night before, maybe longer than anyone else. "Got a delivery for you, Miss Brooks," he said, handing it to her like it was fragile. She opened it cautiously. The paper inside was thick, cream-colored, with a header that bore the seal of the Nebraska Youth Performance Program. Her eyes skimmed the first few lines, then once more, and once more after that. Her breath caught in her chest. I don't understand," she murmured. Coach grinned like he'd been waiting for this moment all year. "You're in, kid. They saw your performance. You're one of the finalists, state level, real deal." Words tangled in her throat. She managed a small nod, then looked down at the letter again, as if afraid it might vanish. "Told you they'd remember," he added, giving her a quick pat on the shoulder before heading off down the hallway. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. Emily turned to find Aubrey leaning awkwardly against a row of lockers, her arms crossed, not in judgment, but like someone hugging themselves. "Hey," she said quietly. Emily stood still. She didn't know what to expect, a taunt, an insult, or maybe nothing at all. Instead, Aubrey stepped forward. Her expression was unreadable. "I just wanted to say, you were incredible last night. Not in a flashy way, just real." A pause stretched between them. "And I was wrong about you." Emily's grip tightened slightly on the letter still in her hand. "I guess," Aubrey continued, her voice breaking a little. "I was scared you'd be better than me, and you were, but not because you hit every note. It was the way people listened to you. I never knew silence could sound like that." It wasn't an apology wrapped in ribbons, but it felt honest. Emily nodded slowly. "Thanks. That means something." Neither said more. Aubrey gave a faint smile and slipped into the crowd, no longer towering or small, just human. That afternoon, a handwritten note found its way into Emily's locker. The handwriting was careful, precise. "Meet me in the music room after last bell. CJ." She knew immediately who it was from. Miss Jenkins was already at the piano when Emily entered. The sunlight from the west windows bathed the old room in gold, casting long shadows across the scuffed tile floor. The teacher didn't look up immediately. Her fingers traced the faded keys as if memorizing one final time. "Come in," she said. Emily stepped quietly inside. "You're going to be hearing my name less around here," Miss Jenkins said, her voice calm but softer than usual. "I'm retiring at the end of the semester." Emily blinked. "But you can't—" Miss Jenkins offered a thin smile. "Don't worry, I'm not vanishing, just making space. People like you come along and make a person realize when it's time to pass the key." From her cardigan pocket, She pulled out a tiny brass key on a weathered ribbon. "This used to open the first piano I ever practiced on. My father kept it in the choir room of our church. It's seen more false starts and breakthroughs than I can count. And now, it should be yours." Emily took it with both hands. It felt heavier than it looked. "Thank you," she whispered. Miss Jenkins nodded. "Play something for me next time we cross paths. I'll be listening." That night, the barn glowed with soft light and warmth that only memory and music could build. Sam had pulled out an old kettle, the one they used every winter for cocoa, and the smell of cinnamon drifted faintly in the air. They sat on a blanket, her notebook between them, his guitar resting against his leg. She flipped to a fresh page. "What do we write about now?" He strummed a quiet chord. "Maybe what comes after applause, when the world is quiet and you're still full of sound." She nodded. "Like learning how to breathe again." They played with melodies, wrote scraps of lyrics, crossed things out. No deadline, no pressure, just the peace of being heard by the one person who mattered. She looked up, smiled gentle but sure. "I think this one's called Still Here." He strummed the chord again. "That says it all." The echoes from the stage hadn't faded, but in that barn, a new song was already waiting to be born, and this time, the echo would last longer than the silence ever did. It began with the bench. One slow afternoon in early spring, while the wind still held a bite but the earth smelled of thawing roots, Sam took to the cottonwood tree behind the barn. The same tree that had once shaded picnics, then cast lonely shadows after his wife passed, now stood as a silent witness to change. He worked in quiet rhythm, his pocket knife etching through the thick plank of wood he had sanded smooth days before. The legs, made from the same cedar as the barn beams, were sturdy, grounded. By mid-afternoon, the bench sat cradled beneath the wide limbs, facing west toward the fields. On its backrest, carved with careful, deliberate strokes, were the words, "The Listening Tree." When Emily saw it later that evening, her cheeks flushed from biking home, she stopped beside it without speaking. Sam watched from the porch as she ran her fingers over the carving, as if testing whether it would speak back. "Why that name?" she asked finally, without turning. He shrugged. "Seemed like the kind of tree that holds stories, just needed a seat nearby to hear them." That night, over chili and cornbread, she floated the idea gently, like a leaf landing on water. What if we hosted a night? Like an open mic, just for kids like me. The quiet ones. Sam stirred his chili. "In the barn?" "Yeah, we have space. And your old amp still works, doesn't it?" He smiled, a slow grin that reached all the way to the corners of his eyes. "Let's do it." The first night, it was just 4 of them. Emily, her friend Trevor, who recited a short story about a robot dog with stage fright, a girl named Maya, who sang 2 lines of a lullaby before running off the makeshift stage, and Sam, who played backup chords on guitar with the ease of someone who'd finally remembered where he left a part of himself. Emily stood near the entrance, a paper cup of lemonade in her hand, her voice hoarse from welcoming guests, her smile uncertain but hopeful. Each kid who walked through that barn door reminded her of someone she used to be. Hunched shoulders, darting eyes, notebooks clutched tight like armor. By the 3rd weekend, the barn was warm with lamplight and the buzz of quiet energy. Strings of soft lights were draped across the beams, casting golden halos over the kids who dared to step into that circle. No judges, no scores, just a mic, a stool, and a room full of patient ears. It was during the 4th gathering that she met Lily, a 6th grader with a pageboy haircut, chipped purple nail polish, and a voice barely above a whisper. She didn't want to go up, but she watched, clutching a beat-up journal with cartoon stickers peeling at the corners. Emily knelt beside her after everyone had gone. "Did you want to share something?" Lily shook her head violently. Yes. Maybe next time." Emily handed her a card, hand-lettered with looping script. "The Listening Tree. Every Saturday, 7 p.m. No judgment, just ears." That next Saturday, Lily read a poem about losing her cat and how silence could sometimes feel like thunder. The entire barn sat still until she finished. Then someone clapped. Then someone else. and Emily, sitting near the hay bales, felt a pressure rise in her chest that had nothing to do with stage fright and everything to do with pride. Sam never said much during the gatherings. He tuned guitars, made cocoa, adjusted mic stands. But when someone needed backup, a quiet chord progression, or a rhythm to fall back into when they forgot the next line, he was there. His fingers, once stiff with disuse, now danced across strings with quiet confidence. He even hummed now and then, lost in the moment. The barn that had once been a place of mourning had become something else entirely, a place where voices that didn't think they mattered learned otherwise. Emily watched it all unfold, week by week. She found herself guiding, not just performing, coaching a boy on pacing during his monologue, helping Maya breathe through nerves, sharing tips on lyric writing with a girl who rhymed pain with window pane, and then looked up, amazed, when Emily said it was beautiful. One night, after the crowd had thinned and the lights were half dimmed, Sam sat beside her under the cottonwood. The bench was still warm from the day's sun. "This is your doing," he said quietly. Emily shook her head. "Number, it's ours." He looked at her, eyes thoughtful. "Funny thing. For a long time, I thought music had abandoned me. Turns out I was the one who walked away." She rested her head on his shoulder. The breeze stirred the branches above, rustling like applause just for them. And under the listening tree, with nothing but night around them, and stories still echoing in the rafters, they sat together, knowing the barn was no longer just wood and nails. It was a vessel now, a cradle for courage, a place where echoes lingered longer because someone finally dared to listen. That night, before heading in, Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded note from Lily. It read in messy handwriting, "Thank you for hearing the parts I didn't say out loud." She smiled. The listening tree wasn't just a name anymore. It was a promise. The sky that evening looked like parchment soaked in gold tea, soft, quiet, and heavy, with the kind of stillness that made you want to listen. Not for a sound exactly, but for something older than that. Maybe a memory, maybe a whisper. Emily sat alone in the barn with a folded piece of paper resting in her lap. It was a letter she'd written over the past week in pieces, on her bed, at the listening tree, even during lunch in the library. She hadn't told her dad about it, not because she was hiding it, but because it wasn't ready to be spoken yet. The barn was filled with chairs tonight, more than usual. Someone had brought extra string lights, and they hung like lazy fireflies along the beams. A small chalkboard outside read, "Open Mic Night, Theme, Letters." It was her idea, though she hadn't planned to participate. Sam tuned his guitar gently in the corner, his back to the room, pretending not to watch. He always gave her space when she needed it, but tonight there was something more in his quiet, like he already knew. Kids filtered in slowly. Some brought songs, others just came to listen. The barn felt like it was holding its breath. When it was finally her turn, she stepped up, not with her guitar, not with a song, but just that folded paper in both hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, and her voice cracked once, before settling into something firm but soft. This isn't a song, not yet. It's a letter, to someone who's been gone a long time, but she never really left." The room hushed. She unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning lines she knew by heart. "Dear Mom, I used to think the silence was a punishment, like you left and forgot to take the quiet with you. But now, I think maybe you left it behind on purpose, so I'd have room to fill it. I didn't want to sing. Not really. I just wanted to feel close to you again. I thought maybe if I said the right words in the right key, you'd hear me. Maybe you have. Dad misses you. He doesn't say it often, but I can tell. The way he looks at the sky when he thinks I'm not watching. The way he never sits at the piano, but always makes sure it's dusted. I wish you'd heard our song. I wish you saw me walk onto that stage. I was scared. But then I remembered your bracelet was on my wrist, and I wasn't alone. I'm learning to sing louder now. Not because I'm not scared, but because I finally believe someone might be listening. I hope you are. Love, Emily." When she finished, she didn't fold the letter again. She just stood there, staring at it, then looked out over the crowd. It wasn't a performance. It was something raw, something uncovered. Someone in the back sniffled. In the front row, a classmate, Marcy, the girl who hadn't spoken during her first open mic, held up a phone recording. Emily didn't stop her. This wasn't a secret, not anymore. The applause came slowly, not thunderous, but warm, like rising bread, like something real. Later that night, that video, less than 3 minutes long, was posted on social media. It wasn't tagged or edited, just the caption. She wrote this for her mom. She made us all feel something. By morning, it had 40,000 views. By lunch, it had passed 100,000. Sam didn't find out until a reporter from a local radio station called the house. She read something honest, he said into the phone, and I guess people were ready to hear it. What followed was more than either of them expected. Emails poured in from strangers, mothers who lost daughters, daughters who lost mothers, fathers trying to understand their children. A nonprofit dedicated to rural arts programs sent a message asking if they could use the clip to launch a campaign titled Letters on the Wind. That night, under the stars, Sam sat beside his daughter on the porch swing. The wind was calm, just enough to rustle the dry grass around the barn. "I never thought healing would sound like this," he murmured, staring into the distance. She sipped her cocoa, then set the mug down beside her. "It's not about healing perfectly," she said. "It's about singing anyway." A beat of silence passed, then two. He turned to her. "You're not just singing anymore, kiddo. You're reaching people." She nodded slowly. "Because they feel the quiet, too." The next open mic was packed. Kids came from neighboring schools. A boy recited a poem about his brother in rehab. A girl played a cello piece her mom taught her before chemo. A grandmother read a poem she wrote at 16 and never showed anyone. The barn had changed, or maybe it had always been waiting. Near the end of the evening, Emily took the stage again. This time, she sang. No letter, no explanation, just a melody that wrapped itself around every person there. It didn't need words. It had enough heart. Outside, someone tied a ribbon around the branch of the listening tree, then another. No one said to do it. It just felt right. By week's end, the branches swayed with color. Yellow for loss, green for hope, blue for truth, red for courage. And somewhere above them, the wind carried all of it. Words, music, silence, like it knew exactly where to take them. The wind shifted gently through the cornfields, warm for late spring, rustling like a whispered reminder that change had already come. In the barn that once held only silence, music had taken root, not just as sound, but as a way of remembering, healing, and reaching. By now, word had spread far beyond the county line. What started as a few shaky songs under a cottonwood tree had blossomed into something much larger. A national music magazine, Melody and Grit, published a feature titled The Girl Who Sang Anyway, How a Nebraska Barn Became the Heartbeat of Rural Hope. The article included candid photos of Emily sitting barefoot on the barn floor, her guitar in her lap, and Sam tuning strings with calloused hands and a look of quiet devotion. The piece praised not just the music, but the spirit behind it. A daughter who dared to sing through silence, and a father who chose to listen. When the magazine arrived in the mail, Emily sat frozen at the kitchen table, thumbing through the glossy pages with disbelief. "You okay?" Sam asked, standing by the window with a coffee mug in hand. "They spelled our names right," she whispered, eyes wide. "That's a start," he smiled. "Just wait till people start pronouncing Brooks with extra vowels." That month, invitations began rolling in. Sam got a message from a regional podcast called Second Chances, asking him to share their story. The host wanted to talk about fatherhood, grief, and how music had brought them back to life. He agreed, reluctantly at first, but once the mic was live, his voice steady, something clicked. He didn't speak like a man with all the answers. He just told the truth, about losing his wife, about almost losing his daughter to silence, and about how letting go of control had been the hardest and most healing thing he'd ever done. Meanwhile, Emily had been asked to give a talk at school. The auditorium wasn't as big as the stage from her talent show, but the nerves returned all the same. She wore the pendant Miss Jenkins gave her and clutched her lyric notebook like armor. "The title of my talk is The Girl Who Sang Anyway," she began, her voice soft but clear. She spoke of fear, of hallway whispers and broken sheet music, of a barn where no one watched and a guitar that didn't judge, of the first time her voice cracked and the second time it didn't. I used to think my voice had to be perfect to be heard, she said, but now I know it just has to be mine. Afterward, one teacher dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A boy from the back row slipped her a note that read, "Thank you for not giving up." That night, back in the barn, she showed Sam a draft cover for their EP, Unfinished Songs. He chuckled. Truth in advertising. The songs they recorded were stitched together over weeks. Some were polished versions of what they'd sung under the cottonwood. Others were new, rough, honest, full of the breath between hope and hesitation. Emily handled the vocals. Sam backed her with guitar and the occasional harmony. They recorded everything on a borrowed 4-track and uploaded it with no fanfare. But the world had a way of listening when you least expected it. The EP gained traction on local radio. A journalist from the state music board called it a raw gem that shines with every imperfection. Then came the invite to perform at the town's annual summer festival, an outdoor gathering of music, food trucks, and small-town magic under a canvas of string lights and prairie sky. The Brookses didn't go alone. They brought kids Emily had mentored. A boy with a stutter who played harmonica, like he was born with it. A girl who wrote poems about the stars, and another who sang backup with the bravery of someone learning to breathe again. Sam stood off to the side, tuning the strings of his old guitar, worn from weather and memory. Emily took center stage, not because she wanted to be seen, but because she knew someone else in the crowd needed to see it was possible. When their final song faded, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was something better, warm, real, lingering. People didn't cheer because it was flawless. They clapped because it was human. Later, under the stars, a young girl approached Emily near the food tents. "How did you know it was okay to sing when you were scared?" the girl asked. Emily knelt to her level. "I didn't. I just did it anyway." And in that answer, the music continued. Spring rolled into the Nebraska plains like a long-held breath finally released. What was once brittle earth softened beneath fresh shoots of grass. The cottonwood tree behind the barn began to rustle again, its branches reaching upward like it too had something left to say. The barn stood sturdier now. What had once been weather-worn planks and rusted hinges had over time and effort become something sacred. Community volunteers had helped reframe parts of the roof. Old haylofts were repurposed into sound rafters. String lights draped along the beams. A weathered wooden sign, carved by Sam himself, was mounted above the door. It read simply, "The Listening Room." Sam stood back, brushing sawdust from his flannel, watching neighbors haul in folding chairs and instrument stands. No blueprints had guided this transformation. It had been built from memory and momentum, from every song sung here, every whispered dream that once trembled into the night. That afternoon, the sun spilled across the dirt path that led to the barn. Kids arrived holding guitars too big for their frames, notebooks with edges curled from nervous fingers, and hearts wild with hope. Emily stood at the door, welcoming each one with a hug or a soft word. She had grown in ways not measured by height, but by how she held herself, like someone who knew she belonged. The festival wasn't about showcasing talent. It was about sharing it. Emily had called it Roots and Echoes. No tickets, no judges, just songs, poems, laughter, and the rhythm of feet tapping to courage. Inside, Sam mounted his old guitar, the one he had stopped playing after his wife passed, on the barn wall beside the door. Above it, a plaque read, "For those still learning to sing out loud." Next to it, Emily hung her mother's silver bracelet. She didn't say much, just stepped back with glassy eyes and nodded to herself. The barn didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like a person who had finally found their voice. When twilight arrived, the first note strummed from a 12-year-old boy, with braces and a trembling hand. No one mocked, no one whispered. They listened. That was the only rule of the listening room. One after another, kids stepped into the dim glow of the stage lights. A girl recited a poem about her stutter. A boy sang a lullaby his mom used to hum when she worked night shifts. Emily performed second to last, not because she wanted the spotlight, but because she wanted to be the one to turn it off. Her voice had grown warmer, less like glass and more like wood. She sang an unreleased song called "What Grows Here." It wasn't a ballad, it was a benediction. The chorus ended on the words, "Some seeds bloom quiet, but they still bloom." After the final chord, she stepped back. let the silence hold, then turned to the side of the stage. A girl, no older than 9, with nervous eyes and a ukulele hugged to her chest, waited. Emily reached for her hand. "You ready?" The girl nodded, barely. They walked out together. She sang a short, shaky melody about rain and stars. The notes didn't all land, but the room stayed still, and when she finished, the ovation wasn't thunderous. It was steady, warm, enough to carry a voice back to its owner. Standing at the side, Sam leaned against the support beam. His eyes weren't on the stage. They were on his daughter. "She reminds me of someone," he whispered. Emily turned, smile tugging at her lips. "Me too." As the crowd filtered out, lanterns swaying in the evening breeze, someone placed a small basket on the table near the entrance. Inside were folded scraps of paper, handwritten notes of thanks, hope, and quiet confessions. "I sang tonight. That matters. This place made me feel safe. I never knew someone wanted to hear me." Later, after everyone had gone, Sam and Emily sat on the bench beneath the cottonwood tree. It was quiet now, but not empty. Emily leaned into her father's shoulder. "Did you think this would happen?" Sam looked out at the barn. The windows glowed faintly, the kind of glow that looked like it had always been there, just waiting to be seen. "Not like this," he said, "but it feels right. It feels like Mom." He didn't answer, just nodded and wrapped an arm around her. Above them, the leaves danced gently in the warm night air. The bench beneath them bore the carved words, "For the songs, still waiting." And in the hush that followed, the world felt tuned to a quieter frequency, one where every heart, no matter how small, could echo. They sat in silence, but it was the kind that listened. The barn is quiet now. The lights have dimmed, the chairs are folded, the guitars packed away, and the last ribbon tied to the listening tree sways in the breeze like a secret only the wind understands. But somewhere, tonight, maybe in a bedroom with a door closed tight or a car parked in silence after a hard day, someone is watching this, someone who has a voice they've never let out, a story they've never told, a truth that's been sitting quiet for too long. Maybe it's you. Maybe you're still wondering if your voice is enough. Maybe you've been told, by people, by silence, by fear, that what you have to say won't matter. But I want to tell you something that Sam and Emily learned together. You don't need to be perfect to be powerful. You just need to be honest. And you just need to begin. That's what this story was really about. Not applause, not talent shows, not standing ovations or viral videos. It was about courage, the quiet kind, the kind that sits with you when the room empties out and you're still trying to find your breath, the kind that whispers, "Try again," when everything in you wants to stay small. And if you've made it this far in the story, if you stayed through the silence in the songs, through the barn lights in the sunflower fields, and the echoes of a daughter and a father finding their way back to each other, then maybe, just maybe, you're a part of this story too. Because stories like this don't end with the final chord. They begin again, every time someone listens. So now, I want to invite you to share your voice, right here, in the comments. Did this story remind you of someone, a moment you lived through, a song you never got to sing, a letter you've written in your heart but never spoken aloud? We read every message, every memory, every note. You never know who else might need your words. You never know what you might set free just by sharing what's been sitting silent inside you. And if you felt something watching this, if your chest got tight, or your eyes stung a little, or your breath caught somewhere between sorrow and hope, then we'd be honored to have you stick around. Because this channel isn't just for storytelling, it's for soul-telling, for the ones who've been quiet too long, for the barns that hold more than hay, for the voices finding their way back to themselves. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Not because we want numbers, but because there are more stories coming, real ones, honest ones, stories about everyday people doing the bravest thing of all, showing up, flaws and all, and speaking anyway. Some of the next chapters, they're about fathers who mend more than fences, mothers who turn silence into strength, farmers, people like you, who remind us that truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just sings soft and still gets heard. And if you're the kind of person who believes in stories that matter, stories that aren't filtered or manufactured, but born in barns and kitchens and hearts that have cracked and mended, then you're exactly where you're supposed to be. So stay with us. Comment below. Tell us what line stayed with you. Tell us what you're still holding on to. Or just say hello. Because the listening tree isn't just a place in a story. It's this space too, right here, right now. A space where what you say gets heard. And until the next story, keep singing, even if your voice shakes, because someone, somewhere, is waiting for your melody, and we'll be here, listening.